Have you ever dreamt of having afternoon tea with a royal? Do you know how to hold your cup and what you shall eat first? Would you know what to do and what not to do if you ever met King Charles III? Have you discovered the secret message behind the late Queen moving her handbag from one arm to the other? Are you completely up to date on what to wear to a ball at Buckingham Palace or the King's summer garden party? Do you know which piece of cutlery to use and how to correctly use your napkin and where to place it once done? Not to worry, because Grant Harrold, former butler to King Charles III and Camilla, Queen Consort, reveals the secrets of royal protocol and the life in the upstairs-downstairs world of royal etiquette, tradition and customs. Soon you will be ready to float down the spiral staircase and waltz away with a royal, should you be invited to the ball.
My name is Grant Harrold. I'm known as the Royal Butler because of my background being a Royal Butler to the King Charles III, the Queen Consort and Princes William and Harry.
Grant Harrold is known under the name of the Royal Butler, being regarded as a leading UK etiquette expert. Grant's charismatic character, the Royal Butler, has attracted a large following on social media platforms, while the press has described him as the defender of etiquette. He also shares his expertise with the public as he hosts courses at the Royal School of Etiquette, as well as the Royal School of Butlers. Of course, a royal butler will always make etiquette a priority. When your boss is a royal, you will want to make sure that you know how to behave. You can imagine how smoothly everything has to be run in a house of that caliber, so there's no time for hiccups along the way.
I wanted to become a royal butler because I watched a documentary back in 1992 about the Queen and her family, and I liked the idea of being part of this. And I said to my late father, how do you become part of that? How do you join the royal family? At which point he said, well, you either marry a member of the royal family or you will go and work for them. And I decided that the best option would be to marry one of them. So that's how this crazy kind of dream began.
What does it feel like to be the one that runs a royal residence? A royal butler surely has a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. It is their job to make sure the royal family's day runs smooth and easy by sticking to routines and maintaining order. This covers everything from serving drinks and meals to ironing clothes.
I always get asked what a royal butler does, and it's quite difficult to explain because the role is so varied. And the easiest way to explain it is if you've ever seen any of these kind of historical dramas and you see the butlers doing their day-to-day activities, it's kind of like that. So it's looking after, obviously, the royal family, it's looking after guests, it's laying tables, serving meals. But there's also a modern aspect, which is being able to use computers, send emails, correspondence, phone calls. So it's the easiest way to describe a royal butler is it's almost like a personal assistant. Really, that's what you become. And if I can say, it's great fun. You're always pinching yourself because you can't believe you're doing working for such an amazing family.
Therefore, 1 minute you could be setting up for a royal lunch and polishing champagne flutes until they are crystal clear. The next, you could be asked to run an errand. A butler is always ready to go above and beyond to ensure the smooth running of daily royal life.
The training side of becoming a royal butler was really interesting for me because I was already trained as a butler. I went into the industry when I was, I think, 21 years old, and I spent 2 years training in Scotland at a private house, Ben Alder Lodge. That was the name of the house. And then after that, I went to Woburn Abbey, which is now the home of the Duke and Duchess of Bedford. But at that time, it was the present Duke's parents who were living there. And I trained with their butler and then became the head butler. At that time, I believe, the youngest butler in a stately home in this country. And when I went to join the royal household, one of the things that was said was I would have to almost retrain, have to relearn the job as a royal butler. But the nice part was they knew that I was fully trained, so that I was able to kind of immediately take on good responsibility. They knew that I could do the part of a butler, but I just had to learn basically how to be a butler for members of the family that I was working for, because obviously, like everybody, you've got things that you like done a certain way.
As you'd expect, hierarchy is essential in meticulously coordinating a royal household. The staff has to be organised and attentive to details, as they all have particular roles in ensuring that everything goes by the book.
I was lucky working at Harrold because the hierarchy for me was, there wasn't a huge amount above me, which is quite nice, really, because when you think of the royal household, there can be a lot of people involved. At Buckingham Palace, you've got obviously Lord Chamberlain, Master of the Household, you've got butlers, senior footmen, under butlers. There's a whole array of staff where with the king, it was quite simply his butler's department. And then there was, I suppose, originally, there was a private secretary above who you were kind of responsible to. And I had another house manager that I used to report to. So there'd be a house manager, a butler, head butler, that I'd report to. And then there was one other above that, which would probably be one of the private secretaries. The difference between a butler and a valet is basically the butler is there to look after the, I suppose if you like, the food and drink, the wines, the guests, the principals. The valet is there purely to look after if it's a member of the royal family or somebody similar, it's basically to look after their clothes, their private apartments. What I mean by that is obviously bedrooms, bathrooms, that kind of thing. It's just to kind of, again, it's something I learned from a very young age. I learned it many, many years ago about looking after clothes, laundering clothes, ironing clothes, and that's the valet side. So some butlers today have to be able to do both. You've got to be able to do one and the other. And it's, as I said, it's something that I enjoy doing.
Have you ever wondered what the real meaning of the word etiquette is? No matter if we're talking about dining, walking, or even greeting, the word etiquette refers to the customary code of polite behaviour in society or among members of a certain group of people, and royals will always stand by it. When meeting and greeting the great and the good, it is key to blend seamlessly.
Etiquette was originally founded in France by Louis XIV. He had it for his palace in Versailles. He wanted a rule book, if you like, and this stemmed from the gardens because people were walking on the grass, and his gardener asked if they could put signs up instructing people where to walk and where not to walk. And this is how it began, and then those rules carried on within the royal court and have obviously evolved, and our royal family picked up on these centuries ago, and they've continued, they've evolved, they've changed, but they're there. And it's everything from how a member of the royal family meets and greets somebody, to how they eat, how they drink, how they carry out some daily activities, right down to how people are supposed to act and behave around them as well. So it's really important, the etiquette part, and it's something that, again, the royal family pride themselves upon. I've always been fascinated in etiquette certainly from my teenage years, if not before. I remember Christmas dinners when I was younger, when I was 8, 9, 10. My parents were very strict about laying the table, the course being served in the right order, using the right cutlery, using your napkin. You know, all these, they're also very strict about when you met people that I behaved the right way, that I stood if somebody walked in the room. So they were quite strict about that. And then going on to work for the Marquis of Tavistock, who latterly became the Duke of Bedford, he was quite strict about etiquette and how things were done. So I learnt a lot from him and his family. And then going to work for the king, and then learn etiquette, royal etiquette from their point of view. And I enjoyed learning it because, as I said, I was really interested from this young age, and it's kind of developed. And that's why one of my main things I do today is I teach royal etiquette and British etiquette to other royals, celebrities, VIPs, and it's something that I enjoy teaching. I get a lot of fun out of it. And also, there's a humorous side to it, there is a fun side to it, and I enjoy that part as well, because a lot of people find it funny that, you know, you can practice walk with a book in your head to find the right way to walk. And that goes down to deportment, but I think they're fun and they're important. You know, they are important life lessons.
It is not unusual for one to feel nervous before meeting with royalty. Other than being in the presence of someone who is royalty, there are a few other details that need to be kept in mind if put in the situation of having to greet a member of the royal family. Of course, you'd want to be ready when such an occasion arises.
When it comes to etiquette or etiquette rules that are maybe not that known when it comes to the royal family, there is a few. One of the classic, when you meet a member of the royal family, you shouldn't offer your hand. They have to offer theirs first, and a lot of people don't realise that. It's the same with eye contact. At one time, you could never look a royal in the eyes, where these days, you can look at a royal in the eyes. At one time, you had to walk backwards when you left the presence of a royal. In some situations, you still do that, but more often, you don't. So the rules, the more unusual rules have kind of disappeared, but the handshake etiquette rule is still one that it's not strictly followed. You're not going to be told off if you forget to do it, but strictly speaking, you should let the royal offer their hand first. And one other tradition, it still carries on to this very day, I assume it's going to carry on with the king, was that the late Queen, when you had an audience with her, especially if you were receiving an award, an investiture or something, when you were leaving her presence after receiving it, she would offer her hand, she would take your hand, she would give you a very gentle nudge backwards to say that your time is up.
Of course, as all things royal, there is an order when it comes to greeting, but also entering a certain place while attending an event. Each member has to enter based on their role in the hierarchy. Royal schedules are planned with military precision, so there are also secret codes or gestures that the monarchs can make to indicate that they want to move on. The public is aware of the main etiquette protocols, but there are some protocol secrets that you might want to know.
When meeting a member of the royal family, there's quite a few things you've got to remember. Once again, timings, so follow the timings you've been given. Don't arrive late, because if you arrive late, then you're going to miss the appointment. And don't arrive early, because again, if you arrive too early, then you're going to have to kind of do a lot of waiting around. If you want to arrive early, by all means arrive somewhere nearby, so that and time it so that you arrive at the actual time that's been given, or a few minutes just after. Dress codes are important. Make sure that you follow either what they've advised, but if it's in the day, for gentlemen, I always recommend a suit. Follow what the royals do. For ladies, a day dress. Obviously in the winter, you want to think of, for gentlemen, you want an overcoat. For ladies, they might want to wear something a little bit warmer. In the summer, you can even change that around a little bit. And again, but day wear, day dresses and suits are the safest options when it's a formal meeting, but it's not like it doesn't state anything actually on the invitation. When meeting a member of the royal family, you've got to remember that they will offer the handshake, if there is to be a handshake. All you have to remember is to do your bow or your curtsy, and for men that's a nod to the head, or for a lady is quite simply a little bob with either the right or the left foot behind the other, and then just a little bob. But ladies, if I may say, not too far down because you might not come back up, and also try to keep your hands in because sometimes you see ladies kind of doing this, and I've got to remind them that the ladies are not born 747s. So once you've got the introduction out the way, the royal may sit down. If they sit down, then you can sit down, but wait until they've sat down. And then the conversation will begin. Let them lead the conversation. With conversations, there's obviously subjects that you should not go near, and that's why you've got to let them lead it. If there is an awkward moment where the conversation has stopped, don't worry, because they will carry that conversation on. The kind of things they'll talk to you about depends on why you're there, but obviously they'll ask maybe about your background, where you're from. These are the kind of things that they'll chat to you about, and obviously why you're there. If it's a public meeting, and what I mean by that is, say it's at a garden party or an event, again it's the exact same rules, but obviously there might not be any sitting down, and they will lead the conversation. If you wish to talk about something, if you decide to kind of break that rule and mention something, I've always said the safe subjects are always the weather, and even the corgis traditionally was a very safe subject. So you could always have subjects about those kind of things. But there's other things that you've really got to avoid, and especially if it's something that's been in the news and you've heard about it, don't suddenly think you're being nice by asking or bringing it up, because it puts them in a really difficult situation where if they answer your question, the world's media will pick up on it, which has happened in the past, and then they're giving a comment on something that maybe they don't want to give a comment on. So it's really important that you think about these kind of things when meeting a member of the royal family. The royal family has obviously changed a little bit that we have now, because the late Queen was obviously a head of state, where now King Charles III is a king and head of state, and his wife, Queen Camilla, Queen Consort, is obviously they're the most senior of the royal family. Then you've got the Prince and Princess of Wales. Traditionally, it would have then, and obviously you've got their children, but their children are still quite young. Traditionally, you would have then had Prince Henry or the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, but obviously with them no longer being part of the royal family, that has changed how the lineage kind of works in that part. So you would then have, for example, the King's own family. So obviously he's got his sister, Princess Anne, and his brothers, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward. But obviously Prince Andrew has stood down from royal duties, so there is just Princess Anne and Prince Edward who also support the monarch, and of course there is their children as well. But I think the future of the monarchy, I think it's going to be slightly different. I think most year, as the king has been hinted, it will be a scaled down monarchy. So I think going forward, as the senior members of the royal family get older and retire, I don't think there'll be as many royals, if you like, carrying out official duties in the years to come. But at the moment, you've got the King and Queen, and obviously you've got the Prince and Princess of Wales, supported by the King's siblings. When it comes to an event, you see them entering a room, you will of course have the King and Queen walk in first, followed by the Prince and Princess of Wales. And then you would have Princess Anne and Prince Edward, quite simply because obviously Princess Anne's the eldest. But again, it depends on the event, where they are, and what they're actually doing as to how that works. But the most senior royals are the King, Queen, and the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Behind palace doors, things are not what they seem. You might wonder, what is the most surprising thing about the royals, coming from someone that got the chance to work for them? Even though one might see royals as being extremely serious and formal, Grant reveals that at the end of the day, they can be just like us. They have a great sense of humour, have taste for good jests, and sometimes even get involved in practical jokes or pranks.
The most surprising thing I learnt with members of the royal family, including the Queen, that completely shocked me was their sense of humour. I had no idea that it would be so much fun. I mean, yes, it was hard work and it was long days sometimes, but I had no idea the amount of times I would find myself giggling or laughing with senior members of the royal family. And also, their laughter is so contagious. The amount of times that I had to walk out of a room because they would start giggling. And also, the kind of practical jokes that used to kind of happen that they were involved in. I loved that, and that made me feel really at home. In fact, one of the first jobs where I was sent away was to Castle of May, which was the home of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And she bought it after the death of George VI. She had it as a retreat, somewhere to escape. She went there a couple of times a year. And after she passed, it then went on to the Prince of Wales, who took the stewardship of looking after it. And he went up there a couple of times a year, and this was one of the trips that I went with him on. And it was an amazing place. It's changed a lot over the years. It's been completely restored. But when I went, it was a castle. You know, exactly how you imagine a castle to look. And as with all castles, I was told it had ghosts. And one of the first nights I was there, I sat up with some of the staff members who told me ghost stories about the castle. And like a sponge, I soaked it all in. And then it got to about midnight, and I suddenly remember everybody kind of saying, right, they're off to bed. And I think the last two out was myself and the housekeeper, because at this point I was scared to go to bed. And I went up to my bedroom. I went up a spiral staircase. When I got to my bedroom, the top of the staircase, I went in, and at this point I actually thought maybe they're going to do something to scare me. So I looked around the room, I looked under the bed, I looked behind the curtain, I went to the cupboard in the corner of the room, which was, I say a cupboard, it was actually a tower in the room. There was another tower, and it was all, you know, it wasn't modern at all. And I went in there, and there was nothing. And I turned round, and there was a over 6 foot mannequin dressed in full royal uniform behind my door. And the shock of seeing this, I screamed and screamed and screamed, and I couldn't stop screaming. I physically couldn't actually get my mouth to stop. I was aware I was making a lot of noise, and I couldn't stop. It was like something out of Home Alone. And when I stopped screaming, I then tried to move this out of my room, and he broke into two. And I can't tell the embarrassment of being relatively a new staff member being caught dragging what looked like half a man out of my bedroom, which caused a lot of humour to the other staff members, because these trousers came down, and it was a complete disaster. And the following morning at breakfast, the king said to me, was everything okay last night? And I said, yes, sir. Why? And he said, well, I heard a bit of noise. And I said, well, actually, sir, no, there was a mannequin in my room behind my door, and I screamed, at which point he started laughing, and he knew all about it. He found it absolutely hysterical. They'd warned him because of obviously the screaming, and he thought it was a brilliant idea. And so he was, I suppose, kind of involved in it. And this just made me think, wow, this is really cool. This is, you know, the future king at that point, who's involved in fun kind of things like that. So it made me feel very much at home, very relaxed. And I think there was a few other jokes over the years, and also to other staff members, which was great fun. So it was always fun being involved in those kind of practical jokes, especially when the king was involved as well, because it made it even more funny.
Being a royal butler in the modern world means having a very busy daily routine. You can definitely expect a lot of variety when working for members of one of the busiest families in the world.
The daily routine working for the King and Queen Consort was, again, it's kind of similar to any kind of butler job. You're there to kind of look after them and their guests. So everything from the breakfast to the lunches to the dinners, laying up the meals, serving the meals, running errands, going out and getting things, bringing things in, whether it be things for them, whether it be things for the household, dealing with day-to-day correspondence that might come in directly for them. You had to be quite good at emails as well, believe it or not. The days of letter writing, from my point of view, had gone. It was all emails. You had to be good on computers. So there was a lot of that as well. And they could ask, just like anybody, they could ask within reason for most things that you would ask a butler to do, you know, even just going and getting drinks and things. So the day was always varied. And the other thing I used to do was I became a very good housekeeper. I worked at the housekeeping department. I've got a love of being tidy, and it was something I used to pride myself upon as well, was being able to do that. And I also did valeting, which is where you look after the clothes of members of the royal family, and I loved that. I have it sounds strange, but I have a love for ironing, so I used to enjoy putting on some music and just standing and kind of ironing away, and I prided myself on that, because once again, when they were out and about, you see them wearing the things that I'd helped kind of get ready. You always felt quite proud of that.
There are numerous events and engagements that the royals have to attend each year, and dressing etiquette is extremely important, as dress codes need to be respected. But dressing up for such an event isn't necessarily as easy as it might seem. There are strict rules and protocols that surround the outfits that are worn beautifully by the members of the royal family. For example, the circumference of the hats worn is important, since certain types of hats need to be worn at specific times of the day. In the evenings, the hats must be replaced with tiaras in preparation for an elegant dinner.
When it comes to fashion and members of the royal family, they're very much can be trendsetters. I mean, the Princess of Wales has been known for kind of getting people to kind of want to copy her style. In fact, the Prince of Wales's mother, the late Diana, Princess of Wales, she was the exact same. For men, for royal men, traditionally in the day, you'll see them wearing suits with ties. Sometimes without the tie, the younger royals, sometimes without ties, but traditionally they would have ties on. The ladies would wear day wear, which would always be day dresses, sometimes with jackets. Hats are very much part of what a royal lady would wear. Depends again if we're talking about summer or winter, depends on the time of day. Traditionally, royal ladies would wear hats up until 6 p.m, and then after 6 p.m. it would be tiaras, which is a rule that's still followed to this very day. Royals can change a few times throughout the day, especially if they're travelling. If they're in hotter climates, it's important for them to change a few times. So you will see royals sometimes have something on the morning, and they've changed in the afternoon, and they've changed again in the evening for an evening event. And an evening event is where they put black or white tie on. For ladies again, evening attire or cocktail dresses, floor length dresses if it's a formal event. Once again, with tiaras. So you'll notice that they change. I should mention, when I say that the royals do set trends, even King Edward VII famously forgot to do up the bottom button on a waistcoat, and now to this very day, a gentleman should never ever do up the bottom button of a waistcoat. It's one of those etiquette rules, it's one of those things you just don't do, and that's where that came from.
In comparison to other members of the royal family that tend to opt for more neutral colours when choosing their outfits, the late Queen would always wear something bright, as she wanted to make herself seen easily through crowds.
The late Queen's attire changed a lot. I mean, she was very much a lady of the modern era. You know, she always wore through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. You just have to look at it, and she always wore the latest fashion. She looked absolutely amazing. In latter years, it was noted that through her dresser, Angela Kelly, she wore brighter colours and became known for these brighter colours and bigger hats. And I think one of the main reasons for that was it was easy to spot her, which I thought was genius. So if she was at an event and say there was a lot of people with different dresses and suits and things on, the Queen, you could spot her because of her beautiful outfits. One described the colours of the rainbow. You know, some of the things she would wear was stood out so much, and always, I think, almost always had a hat on, which again is a very old tradition, but something that she would always do. And gloves, she always had her gloves, which I believe was also to protect her from germs, which was again a traditional thing to do, to wear gloves, but something that she took seriously. And you would always see her with a handbag. She would never get in without a handbag. And as you all know, she liked to keep a sandwich in her handbag apparently.
Would you know what to wear at a royal state banquet? Or how to excuse yourself politely if you might need to use the facilities? A royal state banquet is a notable event. This is the occasion in which the monarch hosts a dinner in honour of a visiting head of state. A butler knows all about appropriate attire and behaviour you'd need to adopt in case you find yourself invited to a royal event. If invited, one should always make sure they stick to the dress code. Attending such a special event is not something that happens every day. Any guest would want to look flawless.
State banquets are very different to... The planning's very different to a traditional royal meal, if you like, and that's because they're planned months in advance. In fact, when the invitation is issued to the other country, there's two a year traditionally, and the planning goes on months before, but the actual lay-up and everything on the actual table takes place a few days before. And there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, you've got the George IV Grand Service, which gets put out for decoration. It's also you'll see the gilt cutlery and the chargers, the glassware. You know, we're talking about over 2,000 pieces of crockery. They've got over 2,000 pieces of cutlery. So there's a huge amount of work that goes into it, and all that's got to be cleaned and polished. The napkins have got to be folded. We're talking about 150 for these events. So even though if you look at a layout of a state banquet, it's very similar to how a table will be laid up for a member of the royal family. The difference is it is the finest. They're putting on a show for the foreign visiting head of state, so it's important that they have it's like we all do in our homes. When someone comes round, you put your best cutlery and crockery and glassware out. Well, I do, maybe you don't. If you're invited to a state banquet, there's a couple of rules you have to remember and you've got to follow. Timings are important, so always arrive in the time that's stated. Don't arrive half an hour early because you will not be allowed in, and do not arrive late because if you're really late, again, you won't be allowed in. Dress codes are important. Traditionally, it will be a white tie, and for ladies, it will be ball gowns or formal wear with tiaras, medals, national dress, so it's very, very formal. As far as the actual rules with the actual state banquet, again, it's when meeting a member of the royal family. You've got to remember your bowing, your curtsying. Handshakes is probably unlikely unless you are the foreign head of state that's with a member of the royal family. And you've got to remember things like when the meal begins, there's the speeches.
Mr. President, I am delighted to welcome you to Buckingham Palace on this, the first state visit to Britain by a President of South Africa. By coming here, you give Prince Philip and me the chance to repay the magnificent hospitality you gave us on our own visit to South Africa.
There's obviously the national anthems. There's then the orchestra will play the music as the meal's getting served. As far as the actual meal goes, you've just got to remember to start on the outside and work your way in. With cutlery, glassware, you're going to start with the toasts. So there'll be the champagne, there'll be white wine, there'll be red wine, there'll be water, there'll be dessert wine, and there'll be ports. So you've got to remember your order of having those. Same with the courses, make sure you go in the right order, and always remember to use your napkin, and remember your napkin etiquette, which for ladies is where you have the crease away from you with the opening towards, gentlemen have it the other way around. And the reason being is that ladies can pick up a corner, they can dab and then place the napkin back down, and it conceals any lipstick or crumbs. At a state banquet, you'll notice that the guest of honour, traditionally, this is obviously going to the Queen, will sit on the right of the Queen, now with the King, on the right of the King, as that's the most senior place for the guest of honour. And then there's kind of chain reaction around the table. If they've got a partner, they'll be sitting on the opposite side of the now Queen Consort. And then obviously you've got the hierarchy of members of the royal family and the foreign heads guests that are with them. So it's very much done in a certain order. Conversation etiquette, you'll see the King speaking to the guest on his right, the start and the main course, and then for the pudding, the fruit, the coffee, they'll turn and speak to the guest on the left. This is something that's done quite often with royal dining and in aristocratic homes. It's a great way of making sure that somebody's got somebody to speak to, because obviously if the king's speaking to this person, the Queen Consort will be speaking to the person on their left, and it kind of causes a chain reaction around the table. And it's really nice. You'll see it if you see footage of state banquets, and it's very clever how it's done. You've also got to remember that if the king stands, then all the guests stand. If the king sits, then all the guests can sit. And as far as the actual enjoying the meal, you should wait until the king begins eating, traditionally. And also, when the king finishes, stops eating, the guests should actually also, well, they should actually have finished. Strictly speaking, the late Prince Philip used to say to other guests about the Queen that once the Queen stops, you've got to make sure that you're finished. He used to tell everyone to quickly eat up so that they weren't left behind in a jokey, humorous kind of way. But it was quite a serious thing, because the plates would get taken away once the Queen stopped eating, and that is a tradition that a king, I believe, will continue.
Different events require, of course, different types of clothing. It is known that each royal castle hosts a different event. And be aware that even though the occasions might appear similar, dress codes can vary depending on the celebration taking place.
When you're invited to, from my point of view, getting invited to the Gillies dance, I suppose that is in Scotland, that is a royal ball. And when you get invited to a royal ball, obviously dress codes are important. In Scotland, it was national dress, but of course, if it's, say, at Buckingham Palace, it's going to be ball gowns and white tie and tiaras. And the actual etiquette is, again, you would never go up and ask a member of the royal family to dance. They have to come and ask you. That's one of the golden rules. And also, it's important you know how to dance. Don't go to a royal ball and have no idea how to dance. That's vital to kind of know how to do that. And don't overdrink. That's the other piece of advice I'd give you. I've seen people at different royal events where they drink a little bit too much to calm the nerves, and unfortunately they become a little bit intoxicated, or as the Queen Mother say, they've mixed their pills. And so it's quite important not to get to that point for the simple reason of you don't want to get kind of asked to leave. And also, if you do get to dance with a member of the royal family, you want to make sure that you know what you're doing. So that's obviously quite important as well. And again, bearing in mind that you know who you're speaking to. So it's good doing a bit of research, remembering the titles, the bowing, the cutscene, the handshakes, all the same rules that apply everywhere else apply there as well. So that's quite... And conversation etiquette is also important, that stick to the safe subjects, don't ask anything personal, and let them lead the conversation. Getting invited to memorial, there's lots of stories about what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do, and the fact you're supposed to like the countryside. Well, it helps if you like the countryside. That's not just a rule. I mean, that's, if you get invited to memorial, that's what it's all about. It's about the countryside, you know, what, the walks and the fishing. But if you're lucky enough to be invited, the things to bear in mind is really what you're taking. That's really important, because what you're going to do is turn up and have, you know, you've got to remember, this is a royal estate, a royal castle. It's not Ibiza or something like that. So let's leave the Speedos and the flip-flops behind, and you're going to take a country attire. So it's best to kind of look up, if you're not sure what that means, have a look at country attire, which is normally kind of jackets, tweed jackets, flannels, corduroys, ties, shirts, those kind of things. The most, if you're going to dress down, you're talking about a polo shirt. That's in private, you know, not so much in the public side or with members of the family. You're always going to be overdressed, and it's always better to be overdressed than underdressed. And if you're lucky enough to go out with the member of the royal family, again, it's important that you make sure that it's good to find out in advance what they're wearing. But once again, if you're not sure and you're lucky enough to be invited, it's worth contacting whoever's issued the invitation, the office, and actually inquire as what they recommend you take. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that if it means you've got to buy some new things, then you might have to go out and get yourself a few accessory, including +4s, because obviously they're very much a traditional piece of kit that gets worn when you're in Scotland if you go out on the hill.
What if you had the privilege to be invited to a royal wedding? There are rules and codes that need to be respected, since such a celebration of royal love is watched closely by millions of people worldwide. Grant was invited to not one, but 2 royal weddings, and he knows all about royal etiquette for such an unforgettable event. If the occasion may arise, one shall know how to prepare.
I've been asked if there's an etiquette book if you get invited to a royal wedding, and I know the answer, and I can tell you the answer because I have been to 2 royal weddings. I've been to the wedding of the now King Charles III and Queen Camilla, Queen Consort, and I've also been at the wedding of Prince Harry and the Duchess of Sussex, and there is no rule books given out, there's no protocol. The only instructions you get is the timings, the dress codes, and the venue, and car parking information. That's all you are given. The rest of it, I think they assume that you'll know. I think from my point of view, working for the royal family, I knew how to behave, what to do, what not to do. So there was no need for me to kind of go along and get anything wrong. And the good thing is when I'm at an event like that, if somebody was there that didn't know what to do, they would actually come up and ask you. They would come up and say, "Oh, Grant, I want to say hello to a member of the royal family, and if I get the opportunity, what do I do?" So people like myself would be telling them what they should and shouldn't do. But as far as the actual the protocols or the etiquette as to what to do, you wouldn't be given a manual. I think, if anything, people would either be doing their research online or hopefully getting in touch with someone like myself to give them advice on what they should and shouldn't do.
The royal family has to always be prepared for any situation, even when travelling. While abroad, a royal is always expected to carry a fully black outfit in case tragedy strikes and it is necessary to attend a funeral unexpectedly. Such a sombre event requires appropriate outfits for the monarchs to wear as they pay their respects and give their condolences. For members of the general public that want to pay their respects on such an unhappy event, clothing must be appropriate. Behaviour is also key, of course. You need to be respectful towards the other mourners as well as the members of the family of the deceased if they happen to be around.
In this country, we don't often have state funerals, and obviously we had one very recently. It's interesting because royal mourning colour has changed. At one point it used to be white. If you go back to when the Queen Mother's mother passed, the Queen Mother famously wore the white wardrobe, which was very famous. Where today, black has become the colour that is worn by members of the royal family when in mourning, and black ties. In fact, I think members of the royal household, both past and present, all had black ties on as well, as I did during the time after the Queen's death. And they do take this very seriously because obviously it's important to get it right with what to wear. And that royal period of mourning goes on for about a month. As far as protocols and etiquette, I mean, yes, there's so many rules that have to be followed. There's this kind of, it was interesting because obviously it's been a long time since we've had a state funeral, but of course there's things that have to be done and a lot of planning that goes into it, and it was nice to see so many people paying respect to the Queen when she passed recently. But there isn't, it's a difficult one because I think the biggest changes is obviously when, for example, with the Queen dying, is that her son immediately becomes king, and that's the biggest thing. You're still bowing and curtsying, but the titles have all changed, and that's the biggest change, is knowing what everyone's now called and how to address them. I was always made aware that when a member of the royal family travels, especially if they're overseas, they'll always carry a black outfit or something similar, so just in case. But I think that's obvious. I think that's quite a sensible thing to do, because what they don't want to do is be in another country or somewhere far away where they can't suddenly put on a black tie or always to show respect. I should also mention black armbands are something that the royal household wore recently after the Queen's death, which again is a very traditional thing. So the interesting thing is when you think about etiquette kind of being broken or rules changing, is where you've got the staff and members of the royal family dancing together, which is obviously quite an unusual thing. From my point of view, when I was at Balmoral Castle, this is what I thought was extraordinary, was getting to dance with members of the royal family, because you are there, obviously, as well, from my point of view, as a butler, and suddenly there I am at a ball dancing with members of the royal family. And you've still got to remember how to behave, you've still got to remember to keep conversation to safe subjects, but it is extraordinary. I can't say it's not, because to be dancing with these senior members of the royal family and have everyone looking at you as well, it's extraordinary, and you feel lucky that you get those opportunities. In fact, for me, there was many times when I was off duty and I'd get invited to things, lunches, receptions, events, obviously the balls, even at Buckingham Palace, and it was always really something to be asked to go. But obviously it was strange, because suddenly you're a staff member, but you're there as a guest, so it could be a little bit confusing. My younger brother actually worked for the Queen at one point many years ago, and I always remember being at this one event as a guest. It was actually the wedding of the now King and Queen Consort, and I remember being, as I was there as a guest, and I was being offered drinks, and I remember turning around and this butler was behind me waiting to offer me a drink, and it was actually my brother. And trying not to break, trying to stay in this zone of being a guest. I remember kind of looking at him and saying, "Oh, thank you, my good man," and taking the glass. I don't think he's ever forgiven me for that somehow. But it was amazing. You feel privileged and lucky to get to experience both sides when being around members of the royal family.
Even though there have been several moments in which etiquette has been broken, the royals know how to react accordingly to avoid embarrassing moments. If a guest would make a mistake around the Queen, she would often try to mimic the gesture to make sure nobody felt out of place. Even though nowadays royals tend to find some of the breaching of etiquette rules rather amusing, this wasn't exactly the case a few hundreds of years ago. Punishments that took place in the Tower of London were no joke.
I think over the years there's been many stories about etiquette being broken or people forgetting the rules. It does happen. One of my favourite stories was the Queen had a dinner and they had finger bowls, which I believe was for the fruit course. And one of the guests picked up the bowl thinking it was a glass of water. And the story was that the Queen did the same to make them feel comfortable, which I think shows you that even, whether it's true or not, I think it shows you that even if you do break royal protocol or etiquette, the royals being masters when it comes to etiquette, they'll do whatever it takes to make the other person feel comfortable, which I thought was lovely. And the only other time I've ever kind of seen, if you like, the etiquette kind of broken or rules broken is just if somebody forgets how to address them or forgets how to bow a courtesy, or but again, they don't get told off for that. It's just the royal family have, I mean, a couple of years ago you'd been off to the Tower of London. With the royal family today, there's no obligation. Nobody has to bow a courtesy or get the title right. If they make a mistake, you're not going to get told off. If anything, they might even find it funny. So, which is really nice and really important, because it shows that it's a modern monarchy, which is, I've always said, is important for it to continue. It has to be a modern monarchy.
You'd expect nothing but elegance from one of the most notable families in the world. The following of centuries-old etiquette and protocol is key, not only to special events and celebrations, but also in everyday life. From the way they walk and sit to the way they eat and drink, grace and sophistication are the foundation of their every move. Should you ever be invited to the ball, consider yourself prepared.